Main Street quick. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I enjoyed
Next week I got a client in town Wednesday, Thursday.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Monday, Tuesday, Friday.
What dude? What day?
Alrighty, welcome to our 420 rally, our second annual rally of the Low Country Normal. First thing I'd like to mention to you today, our rally is based around our new brochure. If you look inside our brochure, and if you haven't gotten yet, I'll have some volunteers bring some brochures over. We have in here our 6 points of focus that we were going to be discussing today. We've invited some speakers from other nonprofit organizations to come in and share their insight on these particular subjects with you. Before we get started with our regular lineup of speakers, I would like to invite Dimitri Cherney up to talk with us a little bit. He is a candidate for Congress.
Yeah.
In which district number?
This one. Well, actually, that one. I'm in the 1st Congressional District, which is entirely gerrymandered, which is why I'm doing something very unusual this year. The other side of Calhoun is the 1st Congressional District. We happen to be in the 6th Congressional District. And then the 1st starts again up in North Rhett. And then Mount Pleasant is the 1st, and West Ashley is the 1st. But this whole really cool part of town is not in my district. In 2016, I ran for the 2nd time for Congress to replace Mark Sanford. Anybody know Mark Sanford? You heard of this guy? Oh, thank you. Well, Mark, I think, is maybe an okay kind of guy, and actually he's in support of medical marijuana here in the state, as is our other competitor, Katie Arrington, this year. And I think the time is coming for all of this stuff. So a lot of people are kind of jumping on the bandwagon. I've been in favor of legalization, decriminalization, complete normalization of marijuana now, ever since the first time I ran in 2014, and frankly, I've been all for it long before that. I think it's probably the criminalization of marijuana and the fact that so many people on both sides of the political spectrum smoke weed. I mean, what has this done to our psyche where all of us are always afraid of being arrested just a little bit, you know? And I think it must make America a very strange place. Now, I've been to Amsterdam, and well, that's just so freeing over there. I haven't been to any of the new states where it's actually legal yet, but it's time to decriminalize this, just to legalize it safely if we can, make sure people aren't going to be having stuff that's laced with who knows what. But anyways, I'm running for Congress to replace Mark Sanford. This year, instead of running on the Democratic ticket like I did in 2016, and in fact, when I ran in 2016, I got more votes than anybody had ever gotten in the 1st Congressional District before, but I still fell 70,000 votes short. And when I looked at the results from the rest of the state, there were 5 other Democratic candidates running. They were all 70,000 votes or more short. And that kind of makes you go, huh? How could they all be 70,000 votes short? That is the evidence of gerrymandering. So I thought to myself for a couple of days, how can we get around gerrymandering? I can't get 70,000 more people to come out and vote. I had 15,000 more people come out and vote for me last year than have ever voted before for a Democratic candidate. So this year, I'm playing a little dirty. I'm playing by the rules the Republicans set up when the Civil Rights Act came into power in 1967, because the Republican Party, and back then it was actually the Democrats that were in power, they wanted a measure of control over the newly empowered black voters of South Carolina. So they made open primaries. Anybody can vote in any primary. You just walk in, you say, I want the Republican ballot or I want the Democratic ballot. You can't get both. And you vote for the candidate you want. So for years, the Republicans have been using this trick to destroy the Democratic candidacies. Basically, they'll run their own candidates, fake Democrats, we call them, in Democratic primaries, and then the real Democratic candidate doesn't get a chance to win. Well, nobody's ever used it against them until this year. So I'm running in the Republican primary on Tuesday, June 12th. If you want to have a chance of getting Mark Sanford out of office, this is probably the best way to do it. Now, if you have Democratic friends that are running for office and you want to support them, fine. Go in and ask for the Democratic ballot. But if you don't really care that much and you really just want to get Sanford out of there, you want to get marijuana legalized, you want somebody to go to Congress and tell the story that things aren't working out here for so many of us. 75% of us are living paycheck to paycheck without $1,000 in the bank. And I know personally because I've been doing that for the last decade. We need people in Congress that understand that, and I'm that guy to do that. So please, if you can find it in your heart to go Tuesday, June 12th, to your local polling place, ask for the Republican ballot, check off Cherney, and walk out. Maybe you can sing a little bar of Alice's Restaurant if you want to. I'm glad the old people in the crowd get that. And we could start a whole movement and make this country what we've always known it can be, including legalization of marijuana. Thank you very much.
Got my vote.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Good to see you again. Our first speaker today in our lineup is Jill Swing. Jill is the president of the South Carolina Compassionate Care Alliance. She has been an inspiration to me, watching how hard she works at trying to get medical marijuana passed in this state. I just want to thank you for all the hard work you do, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say to tell us all today, and maybe an update on 3521 and what's going on with that. Thank you.
If I can set this up so I can stream while I'm doing this. Technical. Just gonna sit there like that, maybe. Let's see. The sun. Okay. Thank you, Scott, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak. And I appreciate everybody coming out this afternoon on 420. So I was actually interviewed last week by a reporter from the Associated Press, and she understands that my personal story and my support is for medical cannabis for my 10-year-old daughter, Mary Louise, who has intractable epilepsy. But she was doing a story about 420, and so she had some specific questions that she was asking to everyone that she was interviewing for this particular piece. And everyone has slightly different perspectives on cannabis and cannabis legalization. So she said, just go with it. You know, I'm going to ask you some questions that sound like something that maybe I shouldn't be asking you. And, you know, I answer the best you can. And the first question was, what does 420 mean to you? And I kind of chuckled because 5 years ago, before I started advocating for medical cannabis, if you had asked me what 420 was, I honestly had no idea. That had no meaning to me whatsoever. So for me to be standing in front of all of you today at a 420 event is both humorous but also exciting, because things are changing. They're changing in our country, and they're certainly changing in the state of South Carolina. So just to go back and give you a little bit of background, I mentioned my daughter Mary Louise has intractable epilepsy. We learned there was a Sanjay Gupta story called Weeds. Many of you may have seen or at least heard about it, where a little girl named Charlotte was living in Colorado and had a very debilitating, epilepsy, very life-threatening, and cannabis oil high in CBD but low in THC actually turned her life around and caused her seizures to almost stop completely. So we looked into moving to Colorado. It just wasn't really a feasible option for us, and you really did literally have to change your residency at the time in order to access this medication. So I was fortunate that my mother-in-law lived in Beaufort and had a mutual friend with Senator Tom Davis, who is that's District 46 senator down in Beaufort and Jasper County, and they connected, and she shared my daughter's story, and from that conversation, the CBD bill was born in 2014. A lot of states were legalizing CBD oil for patients with epilepsy, and that bill was introduced. We worked with Senator Davis as well as the House sponsor, Representative Jenny Horn, and anyway, we actually got that bill passed in 1 year, and I didn't realize what an extraordinary feat that was to actually get something passed. The unfortunate thing about that bill was it was what I call a possession-only bill. So it said that patients with epilepsy with a doctor's recommendation could possess CBD oil, but it didn't provide any source. So we thought we could maybe go out to Colorado or go to some of these other states or network with some other parents and somehow gain access to this. But all it did was it forced us moms with sick children onto the black market. And I can just tell you from experience, the black market is not where any patient or parent with a chronically ill child needs to be. There are a lot of charlatans out there. There are a lot of people that are more than glad to take advantage of desperate parents and desperate patients. We were sold CBD oils that we really had no idea what was in them. The very first CBD oil I gave my daughter was called Sunflower Power, and all it said on the label was 20-1 CBD, which I now know doesn't really have a whole lot of relevance. So there was a little bit of a learning curve to all of this, and so then we started asking for tests. We want a lab test. We want something labeled with a lab. Well, what we found is it's very easy for those guys out in Colorado and California or wherever, in Nevada, to falsify that information. You can print out a label and slap it on anything. And what we learned that we were quite often sold products that had no CBD in them whatsoever. So what is the answer to that? I started working with, after going through that experience of being on the black market, what I learned very quickly was that we really needed a comprehensive medical cannabis bill that would provide in-state cultivation and distribution of this medicine, and that it needed to be safe, it needed to be controlled, it needed to be regulated. And so in 2015, the first comprehensive medical cannabis bill was introduced. Now, unfortunately, it didn't get very far. It got out of subcommittee in both chambers. So what we did was we introduced two bills, one in the House and one in the Senate. It got out of subcommittee and into full committee on both sides. On the Senate side, they did take a vote on the bill and voted it down. On the House side, it sat in that committee without a vote. So in the next legislative session, which started in 2017, once again we had the same strategy. The South Carolina Compassionate Care Act was introduced on the very first day of session once again by Senator Tom Davis in the Senate and Charleston House member Peter McCoy in the House. And once again, we got those bills out of subcommittee, and we had actually the subcommittee in the Senate just passed a few weeks ago, and then passed again 1 week later in full committee. And the reason why that is exciting is because that committee chairman, Harvey Peeler, is not supportive of our cause, but he was willing to take the vote in committee and let the bill go through the legislative process. So that was very exciting for us. That was a huge victory in the fact that they actually took the vote and we got the bill out of committee. On the House side, the bill has essentially been sitting in committee for 4 years, because even though you have to introduce a new bill every 2 years, it's roughly the same bill. And we have a chairman in that committee, Chairman Leon Howard, who is very supportive of the legislation, but for political reasons and pressure from the Speaker of the House, the bill did not get out of committee. And yesterday, for the first time, not only did they have a hearing on the bill at 3M committee, but they actually voted the bill out of committee. So that is something that I personally am very excited about. But in all honesty, it's something that wouldn't have happened without the support of a lot of you guys out there. People just like me, who have a personal interest, contacting their legislators and saying that this is something we really want you to support. So this is a true grassroots effort, and patients getting involved and voicing their opinion really does go a long way. And this is actually, like I said, a huge victory for us. So what does that mean? So now it will go to the House, and whether or not they'll take it up, there's only 6 days left of our legislative session. So I'm not sure what will happen. I've learned in 5 years of spending a whole lot of time up in Columbia that I don't try to predict what's going to happen at the State House, but we do feel fairly certain that we will be introducing a new bill in 2019, and everyone keeps telling me that next year is going to be our year. So don't give up hope. This is a process, and this is a big piece of legislation. It's also very controversial. There's a lot of stigma around cannabis and cannabis legalization. So I would encourage all of you to be actively involved in this. A little bit about our advocacy organization, South Carolina Compassionate Care Alliance. We are a patients' rights advocacy organization made up of patients, parents with chronically ill children, and other advocates who support the use of cannabis as medicine. I do have advocacy pamphlets. This tells a little bit of information about our organization, as well as some advocacy tips and a brief summary of the bill. So if you haven't had an opportunity to pick one of these up, our table's right over there. It does have our website on it, www.sccompassion.com. We do a lot of providing education on to our lawmakers as well as individuals on the benefits of medical cannabis, and also on how to advocate for medical cannabis. To me, the most important thing is for every single individual to be educated so that they can advocate on behalf of themselves or their loved ones. So to me, it's all about the individual advocacy. So as we prepare for next session, we're going to be doing some educational events around the state. If you want to check us out on Facebook, I would encourage you to like us, and we also have a closed Facebook group for advocates. And we'll be posting all that information about all of our upcoming events on there. But certainly if you have any questions, I'll be around afterwards. You can ask at any time. But I just appreciate y'all being here. I appreciate Scott letting me introduce myself. And like I said, if y'all have questions, give me a holler. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. I also want everybody to know that over at Jill's table at the South Carolina Compassionate Care Alliance table, they have a fundraising raffle as well. So they have a couple of raffle baskets over there. Go on over, get your name, get your dollars flying into the raffle basket, and let's help support them. All right, our next area of focus that we'd like to talk about today is about veterans suffering from PTSD. I tried to reach out to a number of vet support groups, and I didn't have any one of them specifically get back to me about representing their organization. But thankfully, we have Eric Allen, who has spent a lot of time advocating with Delaware Normal up in Delaware, also promoting the People's Party and the Green Party here today. Eric Allen's going to talk a little bit about PTSD and veterans.
All right.
How's everybody doing?
Hey.
Alright, so I'm using my phone because I didn't have my notes with me. I was late for work here. But thanks to Scott for putting this together. I'm glad everybody came out today. Unfortunately, you're stuck with me now talking about this stuff, but I was going to give you a quick little brief rundown. As Scott said, I am from Delaware originally. I started an organization in 2004 called Hemp Education Awareness League, which was Heel, Delaware. A friend of mine came home with some shoes. They were hemp shoes, and I had no idea what hemp was, and it changed my life. So next thing I know, I got involved in it because nobody was talking about it, and the more and more I learned about it, I found out, 14 years later, I'm still learning about it, and ended up learning more about like the endocannabinoid system, which I'm not sure. I got here a little late. I'm not sure if somebody talked about it already. All right, cool. I got the nose. All right. So, but the endocannabinoid system actually is very relevant when it comes to PTSD. As the young lady was talking here earlier about Charlotte's Web, how it's helped with like epilepsy and other neurological diseases and afflictions. So when it comes to PTSD, obviously it's a traumatic brain injury or traumatic I call it a brain injury, but it's a traumatic experience that lots of people suffer from, depending on what you go through. But I used to be in the military. I was in the infantry. I did 2 tours in Kuwait in the 90s. Fortunately, I didn't have to go through any battle, but I was over there. I just got one of the lucky ones. I didn't have to worry about going through that. But I do want to share a little story to tell you kind of why I got involved with the like how it pertains to PTSD and the soldiers themselves. It's kind of a funny story. It's real quick, but it's when I got out of the Army, I had never smoked pot before. As far as I knew, that was the devil weed. And so I came home. I was hanging out with some old friends from high school. They were Dean's List students at the university. They were smoking pot around a campfire. And I was looking around. I was like, all right, well, if these guys are doing it, it can't be that bad. So I tried it for the first time. And literally, a lot of people tell you the first time you smoke pot, you don't feel it. Well, I definitely felt it. And the experience I had with it was, and this is just THC, obviously, with lower levels of CBDs and CBLs and whatnot. But I just remember it, like this feeling washing over me, where like I just was like, and I said this to my friend next to me, and I said it a little louder than I expected, but I was like, man, I really don't feel like killing anybody right now. And everybody got quiet. They were just looking at me, and I was like, well, you know what I mean, right? Yeah. And I couldn't explain myself, and then my friend said, don't worry, he's gonna be fine. He just got back from Kuwait. So, and the reason why I'm talking about that is, like, my training in the infantry and the military police, it's extremely intense, and they definitely, you get to the point where all you're trained to do is kill people, and that's all you do every day. That's all I learned how to do. I like this guy over here. So I had a little trouble kind of coming back into civilian life and kind of relaxing, around people, a lot of things going on, noises, all that good fun stuff. And I couldn't even imagine being in firefights or being in battle, and what these people had to go through. But so I went through a smaller level of it. It definitely helped me when I found out about CBD later on in life, just a few years ago. Actually, it's probably been about 5-6 years ago before everything got real big, because I did a lot of nonprofit work and activist work in Delaware, through Delaware Normal, as Scott said, also the Cannabis Bureau of Delaware. We were lobbyists for the cannabis industry up there. And when I started finding out more about the endocannabinoid system, that's when I started making sense why it helps with, like, not just pain and things like that, but helping people with traumatic experiences calm down. Because now you're talking about the endocannabinoid itself. It works on the nervous system and all the body's organs, and it's one of those things where the best way, without getting too technical, this is the hardest part, is trying to break it down and not be as technical. But they're lipid-based retrograde neurotransmitters. That's what the endocannabinoid system is. Now the CBD, all the compounds within the cannabis plant all have their own effects on those transmitters. And the one thing I noticed about CBD, a lot of times people are thinking THC, that's what you want to use for PTSD, things like that. It does help at some levels, but CBD is actually the way to go. Mainly, like I said, like the young lady said before me about Charlotte and epilepsy, like the system itself helps people calm down. It helps you kind of realign yourself, your body and your mind and your soul at the same time. And I think I got a little out of whack there. I'm sorry, but I left all of my notes at home. But bottom line, at the end of the day, I'm just here kind of supporting Scott and his movement here. I wanted to get more depth with veterans treatments. We can talk about it afterwards a little more in detail if you'd like. I don't know if there's any veterans here, but if you're having trouble, I worked with veterans in Delaware a little bit with my organizations up there. I was exposed to a lot of that, and it always seems to calm people down. It definitely takes away some of the triggers that go off on people when they hear certain noises, and the cannabis plant actually kind of like mellows all that out in a nutshell. That's probably the easiest and way I could talk, like say it. Yes, the one thing I do want to add to this is this is very important, and I don't know how much everybody knows about hemp, but hemp has been taken out of our food supply for at least 3 generations now, since the 30s. And there's been a rise in autoimmune deficiencies and other psychological issues and health issues. People are having health issues like peanut allergies that nobody ever had before.
Government population control.
That's right. And so when you use, and one thing I found out about was, the bees are not pollinating anymore. They're not pollinating our food source with the cannabinoids that we need, and that's actually led to a lot of these issues. And then if you combine all those together, even things like PTSD and not just veterans but anybody, all those things are connected. And they all, the more you learn about the endocannabinoid system, the more you're going to learn about yourself, and you're going to learn about the plant itself. And it's going to help. It would help anybody. I mean like anybody. Nobody's allergic to it. If you are, I would love to meet you, because I need to see this for real. And I'm not saying that to be talked down to anybody. I'm just really curious. I've never met anybody allergic to cannabis ever. And we need this in our system. All of us need it in our system. We're all sick at some point. Even the healthiest health nuts out there, if they're not using cannabis in their everyday lives, they're actually not as healthy as you would think. And all that goes with the mind, body, and soul when it comes to the cannabinoid system, endocannabinoid system, and the CBDs, CBL, THC. It's all supposed to be used in conjunction with itself, and all together, supposed to be used together. And that would actually help, anybody's traumatic brain injuries and issues. And now I'm starting to ramble, so I'm really sorry. But thank you for letting me talk. Thanks. There he is. Thanks to Scott over there. I can talk a little bit more about it over at the table if you want to talk about it. I can be a little more in depth with it. But in the interim, we're going to get the next speaker up here. And thanks again for Scott. Thanks for everybody for coming out.
Thank you very much, Eric. I think I know what you mean about those sounds that can trigger people. I kind of hit that earlier today with the that kind of stressed some folks out. Apologize for that, but I had to do it again. Again, if you refer to your little brochure, our third topic that I'd like to have a speaker talk about today is hemp and the many benefits of hemp. Speaking on that today is Lucas Snyder with the South Carolina Hemp Farmers Association. I'd like to invite him up and give a round of applause for that awesome beard as well. I'm still impressed by it. What can I say?
Thank you. So, hi. Again, I'm Luke Snyder. I'm the Executive Director for the South Carolina Hemp Farmers Association. I'd like to thank Scott again. A lot of people don't think about hemp when they think normal, but in all technicalities, NORML is the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws. Hemp, which is cannabis, is classified as a Schedule I narcotic at the federal level. So it's like the prime definition of why we need reforming of our marijuana laws. Hemp is a non-psychoactive crop. It is an industrial crop. You can also make many people here talking about CBD in medicine, which comes from the non-psychoactive hemp plant. So a few of the things I'd like to kind of touch on is the industrial application of what hemp can do for industries in the state as well as for the environment. I mean, some of the biggest industries in the state being paper and textiles, and they clear a lot of trees, they hurt the environment, hurt the soil. Just on textiles, cotton's a big crop in the South, especially in South Carolina. For a hemp crop to grow a comparable fiber, you get more fiber per acre. You use about 20% of the water per acre, and you don't use any of the pesticides or chemicals. So kind of in the long-term things, that's removing pesticides from the environment, cleaning up the environment at the same time. When someone wears a shirt that was grown out of cotton, unbeknownst to them, the chemicals transfer to their body. So you're getting those chemicals. People can do tests, and chemicals are all inside the body. From what we wear, from everything we come into interaction with. And if we have a non-pesticide, non-chemical hemp textiles, we can, we can live a kind of a cleaner and healthier life. And another one of the benefits, paper. Paper, I know if anybody's who's from around, everybody from around Charleston? Anybody ever smelled West Vaco?
Oh.
So that's because of a lot of the chemicals that are associated with the paper making process. Now, hemp is the main material that historically has been used for paper. I know everybody's probably heard the Declaration of Independence drafted on hemp paper. A lot of canvas comes from cannabis, and they were made with hemp paper. And so an acre of hemp provides 4 times the amount of raw materials as an acre of trees. It takes 90 to 120 days to grow it versus 80 to 20 years. So if we are able to use this as a feedstock for raw material, it saves our forests. It also is a carbon negative material, which means that it in the growing process takes more carbon out of the air, out of the environment than it does to make the product that you're making. So you take the carbon out, it removes a lot of the construction energy waste. And another big part about hemp is also health foods. So hemp is considered to be a superfood. It has 3 tablespoons of hemp has about 11 grams of protein, so it's one of the highest plant-based protein, as well as having omega-3, 6, and 9. And kind of plays off what the last speaker was saying. This is something that is traditionally and historically has been a part of civilization, a part of people. People are used to using cannabis and reaping the benefits of it, everything that comes with it. And now that this false prohibition kind of has been started, people aren't getting those cannabinoids. They aren't getting the benefits that generations and generations have had before. So it's kind of putting us at a downward spot. And the South Carolina Hemp Farmers Association was founded because for the first time in about 70 years, South Carolina farmers are going to be able to grow hemp. Been through the legislative process. I know Jill mentioned it kind of started back in 2013. In 2014, the federal farm bill was signed, which allowed for states to put in pilot programs. And South Carolina being one of the states, we worked on legislation for about 3 years, and finally last year legislation was passed and signed and approved, which gave us 20 farmers around the state who were able to work with this crop. They're limited to about 20 acres apiece. Next year we'll have even more farmers, about 40 farmers, 40 acres apiece, and our association was set up to kind of be the education outreach. We want to work with law enforcement, we want to work with communities, we want to educate people all the way from farmers to people who just are simple advocates of cannabis as a whole. And we're an organization. We want to talk with people. We want to get this crop back into the hands of farmers, and we want to get their materials, their products, everything that they make back into the hands of consumers, so we can have sort of a chemical-free, all-natural, sustainable actual system within the state. And the market's huge. The U.S. as a whole is the #1 importer of hemp raw materials, but we can't grow it. So if we're the #1, we already have an established market. I believe last year the market was over $700 million in retail sales, all based on products being imported. So if we can get some South Carolina farmers to grow certified South Carolina products, develop the markets in South Carolina, use the textile, auto manufacturing, all these big industries that we already have, get this industrial crop a chance. Farmers are hurting. Farmers are looking for something else. This is the opportunity to do that. And farmers aren't criminals. So the biggest thing, people associate cannabis as a whole with being evil, but it really isn't. So our farmers aren't criminals. Our farmers are just looking for a way to survive. A lot of them have to diversify by necessity, and now we're giving them a potentially new cash crop. This is going to be our first year. It's really exciting for me. I mean, I've been working ever since. Believe it or not, I haven't always had a beard. I was a clean-shaven cadet down at the Citadel about 3 or 4 years ago, and I started my work there with just research on an idea, a concept, and to actually see it come to fruition, to know that we have farmers in the state are going to be growing this crop. Next year it's going to grow more with the chance to grow exponentially more after that. I think it's a big opportunity, and I'm here to help anybody along the process who wants to have a better sense of the education, who wants to know more about it, and kind of preach the word that this is something that has a longer history of cultivation throughout the world than any other crop. And the reasoning behind it being illegal and evil aren't justifiable. So it's something that we're trying to bring back to everybody, specifically farmers and consumers, get you good quality materials, good quality products at a reasonable price. And I feel like I'm also kind of rambling off. Hemp is a very versatile crop. It's a very good crop. It has a lot more benefits than anything. I mean, we can clean up the soil, we can clean up the earth, at the same time providing farmers with a new cash crop and a new revenue stream. So that's...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Lucas. South Carolina Hemp Farmers Association, let's support our farmers. Let's get hemp growing in South Carolina. Again, it's my understanding there's a number of manufacturers in the state. Boeing, I believe, is one of them that uses hemp products in some of the interiors of their planes. I believe BMW also uses hemp as well. So yes, let's keep the hemp growth in South Carolina going. Moving on to our fourth point of focus is we'll be talking a little bit today about civil asset forfeiture. Quite often people say to me, what is that? They don't quite understand why that's part of what we're fighting for, but we have Susan Dunn from the ACLU coming in to tell us a little bit about it. I think she told me she's going to make civil asset forfeiture sound sexy. We'll see how that plays out. Susan, thank you very much.
I told my son earlier this week that I was going to be speaking here today, and he laughed and said, they're not going to want to listen to an old fart like you. So I think I get the old person award here in terms of the presentation. I work for the ACLU, which is a general civil liberties organization. We're not a single issue organization, so I don't deal with issues of marijuana all day, every day. But we are involved in many of the ways in which the criminalization of marijuana has undercut basic due process and sense. There's just some insanity involved in the way that our legislation has dealt with marijuana and marijuana use. If you tried to figure out what civil forfeiture was, and you were one of these people who likes to go look stuff up, and you try and look it up in the Code of South Carolina laws, it's nowhere to be found in the criminal code. It's under health. I mean, how bizarre is that? What civil forfeiture really is some very creative legislator who was probably a lawyer came up with this bright idea that, there's so much money in drugs that we ought to be able to figure out a way that when we catch people red-handed, that we can go ahead and take money and other things of value as well, because they got those things by selling drugs. And so there's a mechanism whereby when someone is arrested for a drug offense, not any other kind of offense, but just a drug offense, which includes marijuana, that the police can seize anything of value that's in proximity of where that drug was found. Now, the theory was that this was going to be they were going to be using this for big drug dealers who had a lot of money and a lot of stuff. Well, of course that's not the way it's been used. It's been used for everybody. One of the classic stories in South Carolina involved a man who lived on his disability pay, who saved his money for years to be able to buy a car. He's in his car, going to buy his car. He has $7,000 in cash because that's the way he worked. He took a friend with him to buy the car to make sure he didn't get taken advantage of. For some reason, they were stopped in the car on the drive to the car dealership, and the car was searched. It ends up his passenger had a small amount of marijuana in her purse. It wasn't in the car. He had no control over this marijuana, and it was just a little bit of marijuana. And they took all of his money. They took all of his $7,000 in cash because it was in proximity to this horrible drug of marijuana. He did get his money back a year later. And after he had to spend money he didn't have to hire a lawyer in order to prove that his money was not guilty. So it flips, it creates a really, really horrible situation. And it's a situation that, unfortunately, law enforcement has a fair amount of incentive to put their hands on as much money as they can because they get to keep it. South Carolina is not a rich state. And in just these kinds of takings, they got $3 million in 1 year. So there's a lot of incentive to keep this crazy thing going. And it obviously violates, I'm not going to go into all of that, but it obviously violates basic due process. This is the police basically being given the authority to just steal stuff. And once they've got it, you've got to prove it's yours. It's not like anybody gets title to cash. So the process of proving what your cash was, it's a difficult process. And, everybody doesn't have easy access to lawyers. And very often what happens in these kinds of cases is people just cut the best deal that they can in order to get their stuff back as quickly as they can. So often they only get back about 50% of the value of what they lost. And this is also... It plays into how the police relate to their community. Because, if the police officer arrests somebody in their home, and it's somebody whose home they don't want to disrupt, they're not going to take stuff. But if it's somebody's home that they don't value or respect to begin with, they don't have any problem taking their television, taking everything they can get their hands on. So it adds to that disparate way that law enforcement relates to the community, which erodes trust. And if it erodes trust, then it makes our law enforcement less effective than it could be, because they're wasting their time doing things that are in fact not useful and don't have anything to do with public safety. Now, that we do have to say that we do have some people in Columbia at our legislature who have recognized that there are real defects in the South Carolina system. And they have introduced legislation that would correct this. It's an odd set of people. It's Alan Clemens, Todd Rutherford, and Tom Davis that we've heard from before. That's an odd collection of people. They don't agree on lots. But that collection of people have seen that this process is really not constitutional and offensive and not effective, and puts us in a position where our law enforcement is taking money from people in the community in order to fund the police, when funding the police should be a basic government duty, not something that has to self-fund by stealing from the people in that community. So that's sort of what's going on within civil forfeiture. There's also a federal civil forfeiture on top of the state federal forfeiture, and South Carolina gets the benefits of some of that too. So there are more millions of dollars that are coming in to provide money for law enforcement, and that again, it's a really difficult situation when the people who are doing the taking get to keep it. It creates a situation it's ripe for abuse. It's ripe for abuse. I didn't ask permission to do this, but since I think it's a really critical issue in terms of marijuana in South Carolina, I do want to say just a little bit about how the Department of Social Services deals with marijuana. Under the Department of Social Services, if they find out that a pregnant woman has used marijuana during her pregnancy, they take the position that that woman is a child abuser, with no other information at all. And they are using that information to wreak havoc in families, to separate perfectly healthy babies from their mothers, based upon this crazy and insane fear and a notion that is not substantiated by medical evidence, that exposure to marijuana during pregnancy is unreasonable risk of harm. Now, I'm not saying that, people are not going to say that, there are all kinds of things that when you're a pregnant mother, they say don't do. Don't drink coffee, don't smoke cigarettes, there's a whole list. And I understand harm reduction. But harm reduction is not the same thing as abuse. Smoking a joint when you're 2 months pregnant, you may not even know you're pregnant, is not the same thing as putting out a cigarette on a kid's arm. It is just not. And but all across the state of South Carolina, as I said, families are being wrecked by this interpretation and this abuse, and then this failure to feel the need to access any real information. So that we need to be asking for the people that are trying to protect our children to actually use real information and not to be caught up in a drug war that the Department of Social Services has nothing to do with. So anyway, if you're interested in any of the work, I've got a table over there with the ACLU, and we're happy to be part of this work and happy to be part of what we try to do in South Carolina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. That was hot. I do also want to mention as a little follow-up that just recently, I'd say about a month or two ago, I heard Attorney Jeff Sessions sort of mention on the civil asset forfeiture that, well, geez, only like even 1 out of 5 even ask for their stuff back. Well, it's not like you can just knock on their door and say, hey, can I have my stuff back? As Susan mentioned, there's money involved in trying to work to get your stuff back. They don't charge you with a crime. They are charging your money with a crime. It's a very weird setup. Anyway, thank you. That's very good information. That is one of the aspects of this organization that I'm just not sure enough of our participants are aware of. I think that's very good information for us to continue to share about civil asset forfeiture and the unconstitutionality about it. Next on our list, I'm going to grab my brochure again, is talking a little bit about decriminalization. We have Kevin Halls from the Student for Sensible Drug Policy from College of Charleston, and I've also asked him to add into that talking about the school to prison pipeline. This is something I was unaware of until I moved to the Charleston area, and unfortunately he's had direct experience with it. Kevin Hall from Students for Sensible Drug Policy.
Good, he's tall. Yes.
Thanks, Scott, for having me to begin with. I, more than most, have experienced the true extents and abuses of state power upon its people. My name's Kevin Halls. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to come here and talk with all of you about the overwhelming benefits of decriminalization and the promise of more sensible drug policy it would usher in. I would like to add my voice to the chorus of those before me in furthering a righteous and worthy cause. I'd like to start my story during a troubled time in my youth. I was a risk taker and often found myself on the wrong side of the law. I didn't understand how laws that were allegedly designed to protect people and prevent harm could cause so much damage to so many people and then follow them throughout their whole lives. I was sentenced to a 3-year prison term when I was 20 years old. It was for a non-violent drug offense, which is eligible for parole at 50% of the time served. That means with good time and being a model inmate, taking mail-in college courses, I should have been eligible to leave at 15.5 months served. The state's parole board is so understaffed that I was not even acknowledged by parole until 21 months inside. My point being, this is a system where no one is watching and no one cares. I understand there should be punishments for crimes committed against humanity and individuals. However, I don't feel that sending a 20-year-old young man who's made some questionable decisions to prison for 3 years, locked with rapists and murderers to become a $50,000 a year burden on the state is really helping anyone. I have to ask, what price did my fellow man pay for my crime, and what price did I pay? My family and I sure paid, from the tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees accompanying the countless court trips to my mother's shattered peace of mind, knowing her son was locked up in a metal cage, without a shred of privacy or an ounce of freedom. I sometimes got strip searched, buck naked, multiple times a day. I wasn't even allowed the privilege of a door to take a shit behind. My every movement and word was recorded. I was counted like an object 6 times a day. The water was literally black for a month. We were filtering it through clean socks and shirts in an attempt to make it somewhat drinkable. Sometimes the COs would toss your room 3 times a day just because they didn't like you. And let me tell you, when your tiny little 8x12 space you're forced to call home gets terrorized, your last semblance of control and order in your life is gone. I was dehumanized in virtually every way possible, and I readily lost faith in a system where the punishment for the crime is not proportional whatsoever. Where prison sentences are handed out for petty to non-existent crimes, tearing families apart and inhibiting the development of hundreds of thousands in a war that is clearly being waged against the people and not for the people. The worst part is, even once you survive and manage to escape the hellish confines of prison, you're now labeled with a big fat F. I have a felony on my record that still haunts me more than 2 years after I've been released from incarceration. As a result, I've been denied entry into many colleges across the country, not even been considered for many job prospects, and had countless opportunities robbed from me because of a justice system that is punishing the wrong people. People who have been arrested or incarcerated for drug crimes are most likely not bad people, and the record shouldn't continue to deny them equal opportunity for years, if not decades, later in life. The process to even get a felony expunged is a typical hoop-jumping nightmare that only the state could possibly conjure up. The F on my record feels like the courts are trying to brand me a failure and handicap me for the rest of my life. These experiences made it evident that the war on drugs was not actually a war on drugs. It was a war on the people who use drugs. With this realization in mind, when I came to the College of Charleston, I was quickly found by the Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapter on campus, who shared my passion for righting the wrongs of drug policy. I was further motivated after attending our national conference in Baltimore this March. Meeting like-minded people from all around the world really gave me a wider perspective and inspired me to do more. I've come to learn we can't change the system overnight, nor change the past. However, we can all work towards a far brighter, and more sensible future. Decriminalization is the first step towards proper application of justice and actually utilizing law enforcement for their true purpose to protect and serve the people. If we stopped wasting resources, ruining lives, sending people to prison for cannabis, we could do so much more, save so many more lives, and make greater efforts to rehabilitate people rather than lock them in chains. The United States has 5% of the world's population, yet somehow we have 20% of the world's prisoners. Something's not right here. Yet rather than attempt to fix the real issues, we'd rather throw more innocent bodies into a soul-crushing machine that kills dreams and handicaps you for life. Prosecuting people for cannabis crimes is ridiculous and an insult to all of us that the state's assets are being allocated on something that doesn't even fall under the definition of a crime. I hope you join me in advocating for positive change that can and will benefit us all. To stop prosecution against people who aren't even doing anything wrong, and to work together for more sensible drug policy and uphold the laws that work to help people, not hurt them. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Kevin, thank you for sharing your experience. I hope we all learned a little bit from that. I know I have. In our little checklist, there's one category left, and that is legalization. Our selected speaker for that is me. I'm a little bit scattered on this. I have some notes. I will try and get it through it as coherently as I possibly can. And what I'd like to start with is talking about a little bit of information I pulled from the Normal National website. We start with the term marijuana, sometimes spelled marijuana, is Mexican in origin and typically refers to any part of or any one of the three distinctive subspecies of the cannabis plant: Cannabis sativa, which tends to grow tall and stocky; Cannabis indica, which tends to grow smaller and bushier; and Cannabis ruderalis, found primarily in Russia and Eastern Europe. Grown outdoors, the cannabis plant typically achieves maturity within 3 to 5 months. Cultivated indoors, optimum heat and lighting, the plant may reach maturity within as few as 60 days. Marijuana is the third most popular recreational drug in America, behind only alcohol and tobacco. It's been used by nearly 100 million Americans. According to government surveys, some 25 million Americans have smoked marijuana in the past year, and more than 14 million do so regularly, despite laws against its use. Our public policy should reflect this reality and not deny it. Marijuana is far less dangerous than alcohol or tobacco. Around 50,000 people die each year from alcohol poisoning. Similarly, more than 400,000 deaths per year are attributed to tobacco smoking. By comparison, marijuana is non-toxic and cannot cause death by overdose. NORML supports the adoption of a legally controlled market for marijuana, where consumers can buy marijuana for personal use from a safe, legal source. This policy is generally known as legalization. It was adopted by voter initiative in Alaska, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. Voters in Washington, D.C. approved the removal of criminal and civil penalties regarding the possession of up to 2 ounces of cannabis and or cultivation of 6 plants. But a regulatory framework for the regulation of a commercial cannabis market has not been established there yet. NORML supports the removal of all penalties for the private possession and responsible use of marijuana by adults, including cultivation for personal use, the casual nonprofit transfer of small amounts. This policy is known as decriminalization, removes the consumer, the marijuana smoker, from the criminal justice system. More than 25% of the U.S. population lives under some form of marijuana decriminalization, and according to the government and academic studies, these laws have not contributed to an increase in marijuana consumption or negatively impacted adolescent attitudes toward the drug's use. Enforcing marijuana prohibition costs taxpayers an estimated $10 billion annually. And results in arrests of more than 600,000 individuals per year, far more than the total number of arrestees for all violent crimes combined, including murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Of those charged with marijuana violations in 2015, approximately 89%, about 575,000 Americans, were charged with possession only. The remaining individuals were charged with sale and manufacture, a category that includes all cultivation offenses, even those where the marijuana was being grown for personal or medicinal use. Recently enacted changes in law in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and the District of Columbia have resulted in fewer marijuana arrests in those jurisdictions. Marijuana legalization and the impact on the workplace. Cannabis use is not positively associated with elevated rates of occupational injuries or accidents. There is no or insufficient evidence to support a statistical association between cannabis use and occupational accidents or injuries. This information is from the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medical in 2017. Next is employees who test positive for marijuana in the workplace drug test are no more likely to be involved in occupational accidents or as compared to those who test negative. This study fell short of finding an association between marijuana use and involvement for workplace accidents. This study cannot be taken as definitive evidence of absence of an association between marijuana and work-related accidents, but the findings are compelling. And that again is from Marijuana Use and Workplace Safety, an examination of urine drug tests by the Journal of Addictive Diseases. That was from 2014. Next little mention I'd like to mention is testing for cannabis in the workplace. This one was from 2010. This comment, quote, is, "It is not clear that heavy cannabis users represent a meaningful job safety risk unless using before or on the job. Urine tests have poor validity and low sensitivity to detect employees who represent a safety risk, and urinalysis is not shown to have a meaningful impact on job injury or accident rates." Also, we have liberalized marijuana laws that are associated with greater labor participation, lower rates of absenteeism, and higher wages. Utilizing the current population survey, the study indicates that absences due to sickness declined following the legalization of medical marijuana. The results of this paper therefore suggest that medical marijuana legalization would decrease costs for employers as it has reduced self-reported absences from work due to illnesses and medical issues. The enactment of the medical marijuana laws has associated with a 9.4% increase in the probability of employment and a 4.6% to 4.9% increase in hours worked per week. Among those over the age of 50, I'm that. Medical marijuana law implementation leads to the increase of labor supply, increases in labor supply among older adult men and women. Again, this was from the impact of medical marijuana laws on the labor study and health of older adults, report from 2016. One other little report I'd like to quote from. This one is from, again, Marijuana Decriminalization and Labor Market Outcomes of ESS PRI, which is Economic Self-Sufficiency Policy Research Institute, the University of California, Irvine. They mentioned that marijuana decriminalization is associated with increased probability of employment, particularly in the young males. The average increase is of 4.5% on weekly earnings. African American males experience the greatest average wage increase, and this data provides suggestive evidence that marijuana decriminalization laws improve extrinsic labor market outcomes, and this result is consistent with existing literature that suggests black adults, especially men, stand to benefit the most from removing these type of penalties. Now, one of the reasons I brought so much into this about talking about marijuana in the workplace is because about a week ago I read an article in the Post and Courier here in Charleston, and it talked about the Volvo plant looking for about 4,000 laborers to work in that plant. What the article from the Post and Courier mentioned was that if you wanted to get a job at the Volvo plant, you would go through a process of an application and a phone interview and some other steps may be involved there, and they get to a point where they're ready to offer you a job. At that last hoop the candidates must jump through is to get a drug test. 70% of those who get that far wind up failing the drug test. 70% of approved applicants who are offered a position. Now, they didn't say, and I would like more information on what they were testing for, what drugs they were finding, but I would venture to guess that most of what they were finding were cannabinoids, which then makes me question, what were they testing for? Are they testing for THC, or are they testing for cannabinoids in general? As we know, hemp products, CBD products, are perfectly legal here in South Carolina. Why should the use of these legal products negate you from a job opportunity? I wanted to follow that up with another experience that I had about 2 weeks ago. Team Normal decided to participate in the Cooper River Bridge Run, and a couple days before the run there was an expo to go and pick up your runner's number and your runner's packets. While I was walking through the expo, I happened to notice a vendor there selling protein powder. Company name was Orgain. First thing I ever do when I see a packet of protein powder, I pick it up, I flip it over, I want to look on the back of it, and I want to see if it contains some hemp protein powder. And it did. And I was excited, and I shared my excitement with the representatives of that company, and they sort of looked at me a little disappointed, and they said, "That is our old packaging. We've reformulated our product because law enforcement people and military people were reporting that they were popping hot on drug tests. And so instead of doing better tests and changing the laws, they've reformulated their product and removed the cannabinoids, removed the hemp powder from it." And that was just very disappointing to me, and I'm seeing some disappointment here in the crowd as well with that. But that is what some of our drug testing is doing. They're not testing for, are you impaired? Are you incapable of doing something? They're just saying, do you have a cannabinoid in your system? And then they're trying to criminalize you for it. I'd like to go on a little bit more. Matter of fact, I am going to touch base. I pulled an article from about 2014 from the New York Times. It's the 6 most powerful reasons for legalizing or ending marijuana prohibition. First one I want to mention here is that prohibition has enormous social costs. As we heard from Kevin, from the students from Sensible Drug Policy, it's affected his life dramatically. We probably all know somebody who has had some sort of social issue with either admitting or supporting cannabis, whether it was my example, when they started allowing employees to make you pee in a cup to get a job, I decided I'm going to become a professional photographer, start my own business. I'll never make myself pee in a cup. It was an invasion of privacy I didn't think was within their rights to make me do, and so that was my way of protesting. It was to get out of the regular job market. Not really a benefit overall. There was probably some industries I would have loved to have grown with, but they didn't want to grow with me, so I have to just take that for what it was. Again, some of the information I shared, this information is pretty close. 658 arrests for marijuana possession in 2012, compared to 256,000 for cocaine, heroin, and their derivatives. Why are they targeting cannabis consumers? Second one on this list, I'm going to skip a bunch of their info. Second one on the list, the benefits of criminalization are minuscule to the, or basically non-existent. By criminalizing marijuana, you're really not benefiting our society. You may be benefiting a few people who are lining their pockets with the for-profit prison system, but for our society in general, you're not doing as many favors. third one they mentioned in that New York Times article, prohibition is racist. I'm not even going to look at their documentation. I know for a fact that you are about 3.73 times greater risk of being arrested for marijuana possession if you are caught with marijuana by a police if you are a person of color than if you are a white person. That is just not right. And even when Harry Anslinger criminalized marijuana back in 1937, most of his arguments were because those people were using it and they're going to rape your white women. It's a racist policy. It has no place in our society. Number 4 on their list, cannabis has legitimate medical effects. As we've learned from Jill today, her daughter received benefits from it. That is why she's putting so much effort into getting the medical benefits here in South Carolina so that she can help her daughter and other people that have medical issues that can benefit from it. So there are legitimate medical benefits. I don't care how many Reefer Madness movies you watch, they're not true. It's not the gateway drug. It has not going to lead you off to heroin use. I have some other personal friends that have found benefits through CBD products as well, and we can talk more about that later. But I'll move on to the next one, which is number 5 on their list. Legalization won't lead to increased use, and we're seeing more and more of that information come through where legalized states are not seeing increased use by anyone, adolescents or adults alike. What they are seeing is they're seeing reduced use of opioids. They are seeing reduced use of alcohol. To me, these are a positive effect. So legalization would be a good thing. It will not lead to the increase of cannabis use until people learn that it's good for them. Maybe then a little. Last one on their list, cannabis is less harmful than alcohol and tobacco. And in a conversation I was having with somebody the other day, less harmful than peanuts. We have a lot of rules and regulations out there controlling whether you can bring peanuts into a school, whether, because people are in danger with their allergies. Nobody's ever had those reactions or died, or as Eric mentioned earlier, doesn't know anybody that's allergic to marijuana. But that is completely illegal, a full prohibition, not just a regulation that says you can't have it here or have it there. It is less harmful and actually very beneficial. I'm going to sort of end my talk there. I want to thank you all for coming out, listening to all of us today. Come on over. Join in on supporting us and our sponsors. And I'm going to just take one last minute and ask Jill Swing to come up. She has an announcement of one of our sponsors is having a special event tomorrow.
Thanks, Scott. Just two things actually, now that the mic's in front of my face again. And no, I'm not a politician. I've learned politicians, you cannot get them away from a microphone, so I'm not there yet. But two things really quickly. One thing I wanted to mention is voting. If you are not registered to vote, the deadline to register for the primaries that Mr. Charney mentioned, June 12th is the primary voting date. But to register to vote for that primary, you've got to be registered by Friday, May 11th. So that's right around the corner. You can go to www.scvotes.org. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes with, if you've got your driver's license handy. Register to vote, guys. It's important. But the other thing I want to ask you to do is not just register to vote, but to be an informed voter. If there are issues that you care about, cannabis legalization, cannabis reform laws, find out what those candidates' views are. We're going to be doing a lot of research over the next few weeks on positions. We cannot, as a nonprofit organization, we cannot support particular campaigns, but we can provide information and help voters make informed decisions. So if you are not register to vote, please go to www.scvotes.org and do that today. The other thing I wanted to let you all know is that there is a CBD event tomorrow at Eucalyptus Wellness, which is on Coleman Boulevard in Mount Pleasant. The event will be running from 11 to 5 tomorrow, so pretty much all day. And I know that Emily Harper with Primo Plant Remedies is going to be there, as well as Molly Lear from Charlotte's Web. They're going to be offering some specials, I think a certain percentage off of all their CBD products. So if you're interested in that, I'll be there for a little bit, not the entire time, but I'll be there for a few hours to answer questions about legislation and advocacy efforts within the state of South Carolina. But that's tomorrow from 11 to 5 at Eucalyptus Wellness in Mount Pleasant. So we hope we'll see y'all there for a little more information about CBD. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next thing we're going to be doing is a little bit of a procession around the edge, but before we get started, I didn't see anybody making any signs over there. We were asking $5 a pop, but you know what? Go on over, grab a piece of poster board, grab a little sponge brush, make yourself a rally sign. We're going to do a little procession around the corner here in just a couple of minutes.